You also might be sitting here and saying, I've got to be really honest with you. I'm giving regularly, but giving has become very mundane for me. I just approach it as duty. I just drop the check, and there is not much joy. You know, if that's you, I've got great news about the grace of God. Because grace transforms not only how we give, which is generous, sacrificial, and in a regular way, grace transforms also why we give. It transforms the motive of our giving, and we see the motive for the Macedonians' regular sacrificial generosity in verse 5. So let's go to verse 5. Before we do that, let me give you the fourth point. This is the fourth marker of how grace transforms our giving. Grace transforms our giving so that it can be an expression, number 4, of extravagant devotion. Extravagant devotion. And we see that here in verse 5. And this, not as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then by the will of God to us. You see, what Paul saw in Macedonia, quite honestly, it just floored him. He didn't anticipate this. It wasn't what he expected. It far exceeded his expectations. And so the question is, why would Christians give money that way? Why would they do that? Well, he answers the question this way: they gave themselves first to the Lord. In other words, they gave because of their commitment and devotion to Jesus Christ. And because their giving was excessively generous, because their giving was exceedingly sacrificial, their giving became an expression of extravagant devotion to Christ. So I mentioned earlier that giving can be this wonderful thermometer that measures how we are doing spiritually. I mean, if you read from Genesis through Revelation, if you just read through the Bible, one of the things that you will notice is that when the people of God are doing well spiritually, they are also giving generously. And when the people of God are giving generously, they're also doing well spiritually. And one of the places that we see this is in 1 Chronicles 29. I actually love this story. I love reading it. We're near the end of David's life, and he is collecting an offering that will be used for the construction of the temple that his son Solomon will build. And we find in 1 Chronicles 29, verse 3, that David himself gives very large sums of his own personal money. And then right after that, in verses 6 through 8, the chronicler chronicles how the people also gave large sums of gold and silver and precious stones. And so they celebrate this offering. And in response to this generous sacrificial offering, David prays this wonderful prayer. And I want to read you 2 verses from that prayer that are just so good, that stir my heart. Here's what he says, beginning in verse 14. But who am I, and who are my people, that we should be able to give as generously as this? Everything comes from you, and we have given you only what comes from your hand. Now this is verse 18. O Lord God of our fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, keep this desire. Now the desire he's talking about is their desire to give generously. Keep this desire in the hearts of your people forever, and keep their hearts loyal to you. See, in this prayer, David is linking their ongoing desire to give generously to their hearts remaining loyal to their God. And throughout the Bible, generous sacrificial giving has always been an expression, true giving has always been an expression of heartfelt devotion to the Lord. See, God just doesn't want your money. He wants your heart. He simply wants to use your money to involve you in the gospel work that He's doing today. You know, I think there are times that we can forget that we live in a wonderful time in redemptive history. And because we live on this wonderful time in redemptive history, you and I especially have great heart motivation to be extravagantly devoted to Jesus. This is what I mean. You and I, we live on this side of the cross. And so as we peer back to the cross, we see Christ who was rich, and yet for our sakes became poor, so that by his poverty, you and I might become rich. See, regardless of how the economy is affecting you personally, you're sitting here as a believer who's rich because of Christ. And in response to that generous sacrifice, we are called to live lives devoted to Him. And one of the ways that we express that devotion is through regular, generous, sacrificial giving. Now, you may be here, sitting here and maybe even experiencing some degree of conviction. I want you to experience no condemnation. You may be saying, I have to be honest, I'm not giving regularly. I'm not giving generously. I'm not giving sacrificially. I know that. And so if you and I just sat down and had a cup of coffee together, I wouldn't say to you, well, just begin giving. I would sit down and talk with you and say, tell me about your relationship with Jesus. I would want to know if you are aware of His love for you. I would want to remind you that Jesus became rich, or was rich and became poor so that you might become rich. I would remind you that because of His sacrifice on your behalf personally, there is a grace that will transform your life. And it will cause you to live differently. And the area where you might be experiencing conviction, that's the area where grace will work, and it will transform the way that you think about money and give money. Because I know what grace will do in your life. Our confidence in pastors isn't our ability to counsel you. Our ability to serve you as pastors is to connect you to the grace of God, confident that it will transform you, every aspect of your life, so that your giving does change. And it becomes excessively generous and exceedingly sacrificial, because I know your heart, you want to give it as an expression of extravagant devotion to Christ. One of the things I was so grateful for in worship this morning, in thinking about this message, is that the Lord just reminded me is that the people that you're about to preach to, Mark, they know me. They love me. And they know my grace. And so just show them Christ. Just show them me. And allow my grace to be at work. So if that's you this morning, this afternoon, if your giving isn't what it should be, look to Jesus. Allow your soul to be satisfied in Jesus. And then ask for that grace that transforms even your giving. In fact, let us be a people, all of us, Covenant Fellowship, let us be a people who regularly ask God for this wonderful, transforming grace so that we can be who we want to be. Be a people who radically live for Christ by being a church that excels at giving.